This is Joe Morse. You are listening to the History of Aviation podcast with Derrick Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the History of Aviation podcast for this episode 42. In this episode, I'm joined, as always, by Mr. David Rowe and Dave Gorman. In this episode, we'll be covering the XB-70 Valkyrie.
Absolutely. The North American XB-70 Valkyrie, one of the world's most exotic aircraft ever designed, built, and flown. Something that just looks futuristic now, 50 years. Let's see, it last flew in 1969, Dave, so help me out. That's 31 and 24, 55 years ago.
55.
Correct.
Is that possible?
That is correct.
And it still looks super fast and crazy. We got a lot of details getting into this aircraft, and I am fired up about one of my favorite aircraft of all time. I fell in love the first time I saw it. I'll probably tell you the story. And and for you poor guys, it won't be the first time you've heard it, but what a treat. Looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a unique looking airplane. There's literally nothing else out there that even looks like it today. And the things that it did at the time that it was built are amazing. And, it's still the knowledge that we've gained from this aircraft are still being used to this day. So yeah, it's a marvel to look at, and it's a monster too. If you've ever stood underneath this thing, it is huge. I mean, I can't, say enough about how big this bomber is. Even though it never got to bomb, it was, a massive undertaking that was an amazing bit of engineering.
Well, and to me, it just oozes sexiness. It oozes just incredible design and forward thinking and unlimited potential. To think that the guys who were designing this were still on slide rules and things like that. I mean, it's kind of a cliche, but this came out of the 50s, this type of thinking, and it's like, let's solve this problem and let's find something that can perform a mission. And the fact that this made it into the production stage as far as prototypes, which we'll go through, is just astounding. But I got to go back. I know the date, and I know the date mostly because I have pictures with the date stamped on it, but it was July 20th, 1979. I was just graduated high school, and my dad took my brothers and I and a French exchange student that was living with us up to Dayton, Ohio, my first trip to the Air Force Museum. And parked out in front of the museum was an airplane I'd never seen before. I had no idea it existed. Imagine that, as much as I love airplanes,
Wow.
that I'd never heard of it. Well, it had been sitting there for 10 years since it was retired and flown to the museum. There was the Valkyrie. It was nose to nose with a B-52, which I did know. And my dad explained, well, this was the plane that was supposed to replace the B-52. I'm like, what? I mean, it looks like it could. At that point, it was still tremendous looking, but I knew nothing about it. And then for the next couple of years, occasional magazines like Wings or Air Power would have a feature on the Valkyrie, and I was just devouring everything I could. But there was not a lot of written material that was easy to get your hands on. So I tried to learn what I could. I went up to the museum again a couple of years later, and by that time they moved it inside, which I thought, well, that's great because, I hate seeing aircraft outside. And
Especially in
then,
Dayton weather.
Oh, absolutely. They put it through its paces. So then found a book on it, and then another book, and then, was looking for models of it, bought T-shirts and badges and pins and things, whatever I could find. But still, I thought, well, this is such an unusual aircraft. Then learning the history of it and finding people who knew lots and were willing to share. It's been a real adventure learning more about this fantastic plane. Lots of cool technologies, from what it's made of to the way that it had, I think, the largest movable control surface on any aircraft. Dave, does that sound right to you? Those wingtips that droop? I think
Yes, I believe
correct.
so.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe you're right.
Six engines lined up that we'll talk about. I mean, just unbelievable altitude and speed and everything. So, I mean, I like the Blackbird. I think the Blackbird's an amazing thing, but everybody knows about the Blackbird. Not enough people know about this. So let's change that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. It was built for the, like you said, to replace the B-52, which is still with us and still performing admirably to this day. But at the time, they were forward looking. They were looking, how do we take a nuclear bomb to the Soviet Union and drop it and come back? And this was before the missiles. The ICBMs were a common thing. They were in the development stage. And ultimately, that's what doomed this aircraft to only research as opposed to being a bomber, was the capability of the rockets to carry nuclear weapons, continent to continent. They could do it in minutes where it would take the XB-70 hours. So that's why it became a research vehicle and did not make it as a bomber. But I mean, it was a forward-thinking process of, we've got the B-52, it's slow, but it carries a lot of bombs. We've got the B-58 Hustler, which is super fast, but is short range. So we need something that's long range and carries a lot of bombs over, overseas to another continent, basically. And that's the design philosophy of what brought this about. And they certainly succeeded in the design. Unfortunately, the ICBMs became the choice of the military. We'd rather use those to send nuclear weapons across, and the bomber was relegated to the research role.
So this plane was designed to fly at triple sonic speeds, Mach 3, and above 70,000 feet, which is an incredible thing to think about today. And again, it first flew in 1964. It was designed in the late 50s, early 60s. And that's what they were thinking. They wanted to be able to fly high, fly very, very fast, deliver that payload, and get the hell back to U.S. soil if they can. But that didn't happen. The developments in missile technology, plus the development of Soviet interceptors, the MiG-25, for example, they always say was built as a answer to this plane, to make sure that you weren't going to have fleets of B-70s overflying Russia with impunity. So that the whole concept of weapon delivery was changing in the 50s and evolving in the 60s. And so some of the things that seemed so forward thinking eventually changed and became less desirable, as you just described, Dave. That was a very real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. The shoot down of Gary Powers in the U-2 is kind of what told the military that, even if we're flying super high and super fast, they've got missiles over there that can shoot us down. So, I mean, those are the things that, as technology leaps and bounds advancements, you've got to adjust. You've got to audible and, move in a new direction. And thank goodness there was a research application for this aircraft. And so they moved it right over into the research for, super fast commercial transport. That's eventually what this aircraft did. Is it was a test bed for supersonic aircraft.
Indeed, it was, and there was a real thought that might be a wave of the future for commercial aircraft, and so it was involved in testing the materials and the construction and the impact on urban and suburban areas of high speed aircraft flying at altitude, what kind of sonic boom signatures might be released, and what you could do to mitigate that kind of stuff. So it did play an important role. Nothing is as important as it was originally designed for, but they were lucky that they got two of them built. There was a third we know that was under construction. Some people say it may still be around. There's some interesting theories about that, or at least it may have lived on in some other programs, perhaps. But this plane had some construction techniques, some materials that were used, the titanium and the honeycomb panels that were built to provide strength and stability, but also not huge weight penalties if they could avoid it. Some really fascinating things. And I had a chance almost 2 years ago to talk to a man named David Austin, who I met through the XB-70 Facebook page. David loves this plane because when he was in his early 20s, he was building them. He worked for North American Aviation. He was an X-ray guy, so his job was to he had a machine that was kind of like an industrial floor waxer that he was running over the newly brazed welded panels and checking those welds with this X-ray machine. And a lot of work had to be done, and some of these things were sealed up in parts that you couldn't easily check and inspect. So they had this machine that he was using. And I'll tell you, 60 years later, the pride that he still has in what he did, what he accomplished, what he worked on was fantastic. And there's like I said, we were able to spend a couple hours up at Dayton and talk about his role. That was for a young man in the early 60s. That was a pretty heady role that he had. But there were other things that were being done, with testing these high-speed aircraft and survivability and the engines that were created to push something that high and that fast at that time.
Yeah. Speaking of the engines, I did not realize that those were actually developed for a jet fighter plane that was eventually canceled, and they were repurposed into the XB-70. So you've essentially got 6 jet fighter engines powering the Valkyrie. So that's pretty amazing. It's kind of like what they did with the B-1, where it's got the same engine as the F-16. Just bundle up that power into a 6-pack and strap it on the bottom of this thing, and just immense speeds are capable. General Electric was the builder of the engine. It's a YJ93 GE turbojet. And it had a special fuel, a JP6 fuel that they developed for it. So, everything about this was new and one of a kind. And I've seen some pictures of the ground crew. There are so many wagons and, ducting. And it was a massive effort of people required to get this plane into the air, between hydraulics, electrical, environmental, the testing subjects. They just, that anybody that was involved with it knew that they were dealing with something special.
Well, and they took a lot of pride in it, and the number of people who were there for the rollouts of both Air Vehicle 1 and Air Vehicle 2, they had big, huge ceremonies, and seeing this thing come out of the hangar, there's videos showing these things being rolled out of the hangars for the first time. It's incredible. It looks like it's science fiction because there's nothing else like it anywhere. I can't imagine.
No.
Knowing what we know now, I still would be hugely impressed if I saw this coming out of a hangar in 2024. But thinking about September of 1964, how do you even prepare for such a thing? So yeah, those workers, those guys who were testing it, those guys who were managing all the tests and all the data and preparing it for flight overnight and everything. What a memory that they all had. Incredible.
Yeah, I've seen the video of that. They pull the Valkyrie out, and the speakers speak, and then they just open it up, and there's hundreds of people and kids that are just running underneath it. It's just like a free-for-all, people running around, and they're like ants, because it's such a big monstrosity. And you have to know that when the Russians saw this aircraft and the video footage of it, they must have been shaking in their boots thinking, what have they built over there? Because this thing is a monster.
It is. And you mentioned about the size. If you get a chance to go to Dayton, it is one of the premier aircraft on display, just because, again, it is so mind blowing. But seeing that size up close, I don't know, I've been to the museum 20 times since that first time, at least. And I still walk up to it in awe. I still walk around it looking up like I can't believe the size, the scale. I take a picture every time of the 6-pack. That's what they call that arrangement of those 6 J93s in back. Because there's nothing quite like that. That look of 6 engines lined up abreast like that, and just thinking about what that must have sounded like and looked like is fantastic. So, the passage of time has done nothing to diminish the magnificence of the great white bird, also known as Cecil. The first vehicle known as Cecil, and a friend of mine shared today, and I'd never heard this before. He said that pilots called the first plane Cecil and the second plane Cecilia, and that is named after a cartoon of the day, Cecil the C6 Sea Serpent. And I know that Cecil was given that name because sometimes taxiing this aircraft on the ground with the nose wheel so far behind the cockpit, sometimes it bounced around a little bit and gave the pilot and co-pilot a little bit of a bounce up there. But David, this plane flew with a pilot and a co-pilot, but it actually, as if it ever had become an operational bomber, I think it was a crew of 4, correct?
I believe that was going to be the case, but yeah, it was only 2 is what we ever got.
Yeah. So they filled it up with a lot of test equipment because, as you mentioned, it basically, as a bomber program, was canceled before it ever flew. A couple of years before, President Kennedy canceled it, but it did live on in a test program, and so they loaded it up with lots of instrumentation and made sure that they wrangled it out as best as they could. It's fascinating to read the mission reports and see just the range of this sucker. It would take off at Edwards Air Force Base, and it would get out over Nevada in no time at all, and out over several states in these big wide arcs. They'd run it up to Mach 2.75, and occasionally a couple of times to Mach 3. It was a big plane to be going that fast, and they didn't want to stress it too much. But maybe you've heard, David, about what happened on an early flight when they stressed it a little bit too much, and it came back looking significantly different than it did before it left.
Absolutely did. It looked like somebody had taken a sandblaster to it and chipped all the paint off of it. It was just completely the stresses of the paint couldn't take it, and it just chipped away. It just massive paint loss.
Well, some guy built a model and used that paint pattern, and I shared it on the XB-70 Facebook page. I couldn't believe it. It was an incredible job of just this modeled, rough-looking plane when it came back. Here's this absolutely beautiful thing, and it just looks like it got the hell beat out of it, the slipstream or something. All this paint chipping off all over the place, but incredible bravo job there for that modeler who was able to recreate it. This plane had a lot of teething problems early on. There were some close calls. There were problems with brakes locking up, I think, on the very first flight, right?
On the very first flight, it had an anti-lock braking system, and apparently one of the wheels locked up. Well, apparently one bogie on the left-hand side, the rear bogie, it just locked up, and when they landed, 3 of the wheels came unlocked, but one did not, and there was a massive fire. And I was listening to Al White talk about it, and he was saying that they were screaming fire, 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 and so he pulls it up to a stop, and they put the fire out, and he goes, "All right, can I taxi it back to the hangar?" And they're like, "No, it's you burned the wheels off of it," and he didn't even know. The Valkyrie was so strong, he just thought, well, there's a little fire. They put it out. Let's take her back and keep going.
That's what they thought. And as I mentioned before with the C6 Serpent comment, they really were way out in front of that first nose gear. It was hardly a nose gear. It was more like a middle of the chest gear, because it was back behind those guys quite a ways. But the video of that thing rolling out and on fire is just like, oh my God. Maybe it was good they had no idea that was happening.
Well, probably was. And that flight, they lost an engine. That one of the engines flamed out, and they had to shut it down. Apparently, hydraulics were a huge problem with this aircraft because it had a massive amount. What did I read? 280 hydraulic devices inside that aircraft.
Wow.
It would pump 98 gallons of hydraulic fluid a minute. And, at the size that it is, and, all of those different hydraulics, there's a lot of problems are introduced with that. It's hard to keep that system clear.
Well, and the most fascinating thing to me is that those wingtips. This plane had wingtips that would adjust in flight, and they would point down. Plenty of pictures and video you can see of this in operation. But that would kind of trap a layer of air underneath the fuselage and take advantage of something called compression lift. This kind of provided like a blanket of air that the Valkyrie would ride on that would help support the massive weight of this aircraft and contribute to its overall efficiency. So a really cool thing, but just amazing to see something so big move in flight and be controllable.
Well,
one of the most distinctive features of the aircraft.
Yeah, absolutely. Because those drooping wings, they provide, stability that it also reduces the drag because of that. You don't have as big a wing now, so you're more efficient. That was one of the things about this aircraft is its best mode was 70,000 feet going Mach 3. That was its most fuel efficient state. That was the best flight characteristics it had was when it was going super fast. And
also my favorite. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But that compression lift, that was a new phenomenon that they were, basically this was the test bed to prove that it worked. And, that shock wave that's generated from the air being pushed around, you just contain it with those drooping wings. And you've got, I think I saw anywhere from 5% to a 30% lift, additional lift that, beyond just what the wings provided. So, I mean, that's significant. I mean, every little bit makes a big difference when you're going that fast.
Well, and it's pretty tremendous to think this is the first time that, as far as I know, that particular technique had been used on a full scale aircraft to test it out on something like this. I mean, those were design features that were being planned as a bomber. So I mean, it wasn't just as a high speed transport test vehicle. That was going to be a feature of it as a bomber to provide it that extra lift and that would help with its range and everything else. Just space age stuff that they were thinking about here. It still is mind boggling to think of all the extras and all of the forward thinking that was going on with this thing.
Absolutely.
It was, Dave, it was based at Edwards, correct?
Yeah, it was. As a matter of fact, I heard somebody say that it was based at Edwards. It took off and landed at Edwards. The only time that it did not was when they delivered it to Wright-Patt to the museum. That's the only other airport that it ever landed at.
Well, actually, that's true for the first aircraft, the AV-1, but the second one made a stop at Fort Worth, Texas. It flew to an air show in Fort Worth, Texas. There are pictures of it, color pictures of it, taking off and leaving the airport, people standing on their cars along the roadway. There are pictures of the lineup of aircraft at that particular air show, and the Valkyrie is in attendance there. That was in 1966, shortly before the accident. You really can't talk about the Valkyrie without talking about how the program ended up being ended, unfortunately. But it did make that stop, and so people in Texas were treated to an incredible treat to have this thing come to them. And I've seen comments from people online who said they couldn't believe they got to see it. And I'm like, oh man, tell us more, because incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. But I didn't realize that it had the second one had made a trip to an air show. So, so obviously it did get out to other places.
It did. So the two aircraft had about a year in between their rollouts. And so the first vehicle, they were doing a lot of new techniques for construction and everything, rigging it out and all that kind of stuff. The second aircraft was considered to be built to a higher standard, had some different capabilities, had the shape of the wing was a little bit different in the second vehicle. 5-degree, is it anhedral or dihedral?
It was dihedral.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Embarrassing. The 5-degree dihedral that gave it a little bit more shape and everything. So they look different. The second vehicle also had a black radome on the bottom of the nose. And we have to tell you that because we can't show you, you're not going to be able to see it because unfortunately, after being tested and flown for over a year or so, I guess it was involved in a horrible accident, one that marred the program and brought a premature end to the Air Force use of this aircraft. The surviving aircraft was then transferred to NASA, who continue with their tests. But Dave, can you give us a little rundown of June 8th, 1966?
Yeah, unfortunately, this was a day where they GE, who manufactures the engines for this aircraft, decided they wanted a photo shoot with a number of aircraft that they provided engines for. So, what was it? The F-5, F-104, a Phantom, and was it Talon?
T-38.
Yeah.
And an F-5. Yep, exactly.
Yep. And so they put these all up in formation with the Valkyrie in the middle, and you've got two aircraft on either side. And the F-104 was on the right-hand side, I believe. And as they were flying along, apparently the pilot of that aircraft lost his spatial awareness of where he was in the formation. He was looking at the front of the aircraft and not paying attention to the back of the aircraft. And we've already stated that this is a really big jet. So apparently he got into the wake turbulence of the wings or possibly even just bumped into it. Nobody really knows the full story. There's video footage of the aircraft flying in formation, and then there's footage of it as the F-104 is tumbling away in pieces and exploding because when it got into that wake vortex, it flipped over, went across the top of the Valkyrie and clipped off both of the rudders, hit the left side wing, and then disintegrated, killing that pilot. And the Valkyrie continued on for about 15 or 16 seconds. And then it suddenly started to tumble and went into a spin. Apparently it flipped upside down, righted itself back up. And at that point, the pilot, Al White, looked over at the co-pilot, and apparently he was incapacitated at that time. Don't know if he had been knocked out, if he was possibly dead. So he did not escape, but the Al White initiated the ejection sequence, got his arm stuck into the ejection system. This was a clamshell system, so that you were enclosed, because if you're flying at Mach 3, you can't just eject out of an airplane. You have to be covered up and protected. And apparently he didn't get his arm in time when the clamshell closed. So he had a broken arm. He finally gets it to close and ejects out. But unfortunately, because of the orientation and the fact it didn't close properly, the full ejection system didn't work. Apparently there were some cushions that didn't quite work right, and he hit the ground really, really hard. It said that he left impressions in the metal from his heel and his buttocks from hitting the ground so hard. So he was severely injured. Took several months to get better. In the meantime, the Valkyrie just spun into the earth and exploded into pieces. But the thing is, as it went down, it was shedding pieces and parts everywhere. So there's a massive debris field all about this. So you've got So
So
just a sad end to a beautiful airplane.
yeah, Joe Walker was the pilot of the F-104, and he was a chief test pilot for NASA. He'd flown the X-15, was one of
Oh,
the best test pilots ever. And so, that it was a horribly unfortunate accident. Carl Cross was the co-pilot of the Valkyrie. That was his very first flight, and he was from Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Wow.
And Carl had a history that I'm still trying to piece together of what type of other aircraft he'd flown. But just absolute tragic that this happened on his first flight. He was unable to encapsulate. And as you mentioned, they're not really sure why, but it was spinning, it was rolling. There were a lot of forces at play. And so he was unable to get out. He's buried down in Chattanooga. And
Okay.
I've had a chance to visit his marker, he and his wife, Margaret, and do some work on trying to shine up their markers. He certainly is somebody worthy of great honor because he gave his life in the pursuit of this test program. So very unfortunate, but the people, at the time were horrified by what happened there. There's all kinds of contemporaneous reports of people who said, "Hey, I know where I was when that happened," and the mood around Edwards was just unbelievably sad. It was heartbreaking, and there are so many people affiliated and associated with the program, and it broke their hearts. The Valkyrie continued for another couple years in NASA service with testing different, as we mentioned, high speed flight characteristics and things like that. And then finally, it was slowly withdrawn and retired and made its final flight, Dave, as you mentioned, to Dayton, February 4th of 1969. Ted Sternthal and Fitz Fulton were at the controls and brought it in. And I think they said they would do anything to keep it in the air except pay for it themselves because it was a costly thing to fly. I had a chance to meet Fitz Fulton up at the Air Force Museum underneath the Valkyrie in about 2002. Couldn't believe it. And I recognized him instantly and got my picture taken with him and got him to sign my Tennessee license plate that said XB-70. So it was a great thrill to meet him and talk with him a little bit.
You got to put that down in the in the comment section for the podcast.
I will add some pictures for all of that because it's pretty cool. But
yeah,
I got to tell you, there's lots more about this plane. I really want to encourage people to get up to the museum to go see it because it's immense. It's at a scale that is hard to imagine in terms of its beauty and its power and its the mission and everything else. So go check it out.
Yeah, it looks like a spaceship today. I mean, it looks like you could hop in it and fly to space today.
It does, yeah.
It's completely modern looking, but it's yet 60 years old.
Well, that's what they say about me, Dave.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I was confused.
Completely modern. I mean, my hair is the same color as the Valkyrie, so I'll say it before you do.
Okay, well, good.
I keep mine covered. But Dave Gorman, you mentioned over on your social media, you just did some concerts over there.
Well, I did. My YouTube channel is called Gormania, and so it has a mix of aviation stuff and looking forward to getting to some air shows this summer and taking some more video and posting those things, but also a lot of music things too. And I have friends who play music and most of them are very good. And so I like to record them doing those things too. So, but yeah, that's Gormania at YouTube. And I'm also on Instagram and Twitter. Not hard to find. Just look me up, Dave Gorman.
And David Rowe, do you have a Valkyrie on Aerophile there?
To be honest, I don't think I've put one on the my website just yet. I've got photos of it that I've taken, but that section hasn't been uploaded yet. So I'll have to get that uploaded pretty soon. But I do have pictures because I have been to the museum a couple of times, and that was when you get to the museum, there's a couple of things you want to make a beeline to, like the B-36 Peacemaker, and you go a little further back, and the Valkyrie is just sitting there. And we were talking about it being so big, they've got other aircraft parked underneath it. because
That's the way to do
there's
it.
that much room. You just slide a few other test vehicles underneath there, and you've got a whole section showing off the Valkyrie and everything associated with it. So
how many
Absolutely.
how many Cessna 172s you think you'd get out of that guy?
all of
60. Yeah. Yeah. That's more like it.
And that's over at aerophile.com. That is David Rowe's website. And I enjoyed it, guys. What another great aircraft.
Oh, it's
absolutely.
incredible.
Yeah.
I began a love affair with this thing from, love at first sight. I didn't know it existed, but I couldn't wait to learn more about it. So very fortunate that I got handed the keys to a Facebook group on the XB-70. The guy that started it was not interested in keeping it going. I've made some contacts with friends like Graham Simons, who's a published author on the XB-70, and about 60 or 70 other aviation books that are all tremendous. I've learned a lot. It's a great place for sharing lots and lots of pictures and debate and discussion about every aspect of this incredible plane. And I'm thrilled to be able to talk about it with you guys.
Definitely a good one.
Yeah. Yeah, something else I wanted to mention.
Go for it.
The research that was done with the XB-70, a lot of that information is going to be re-brought back to the fore with this new X-59 sonic boom that they just announced, because it's going to be doing a lot of the things that the Valkyrie was doing back then.
Yeah,
testing,
but it's not going to look half as cool though.
Oh no, and it's not even half as big. It's a tiny little thing, but still, there's information there that this aircraft, the Valkyrie, gathered that is still in use today. That's how important it was to the development of supersonic aircraft.
Yeah, definitely.
There is one pilot who flew the Valkyrie who's still alive. David, do you have his name?
I do not.
Well, I'll leave it as a trivia question then. There were 8 pilots who flew it. There's one who is still alive. He also flew the Blackbird, and he is an occasional member he's an occasional poster on our Facebook page, and it's a great honor. We have family members of all the other pilots, I'm pretty sure, who respond and share things from time to time on that page, and that's a great treat as well. But maybe David or maybe Derrick, we can have that as a. I'll tell you what, if I can find it here, I have a patch. I have a patch somewhere. I know where it is. It's not where I thought I had it here. It is of the XB-70 flight test patch, and I will personally put that in the mail to the first person who is not named Bruce, who can answer the name of the living XB-70 pilot who still is active on Facebook and shares his experiences on our Facebook page. Whoever can be the first person to post that by time and everything else, I will send that to them. How about that?
And I tell you what I will do. I will give a shirt. I will give one T-shirt, History of Aviation Podcast T-shirt away, if we can get the museum in Dayton to cooperate and see how many Cessna 172s we can fit under a Valkyrie.
Well, there's got to be a 10th grade math whiz who can figure that out for us as well. But
so if we can just get the museum up in Dayton to cooperate with this little thing, and we got to get 172s in. We got to get those in just to see how many. And I will give a T-shirt away for that. How's that?
Can't wait to see it. All right.
It's probably not. It's probably not going to happen. Just so
it's fun to think about, anyways, because it would be a lot. But there's
definitely.
It sounds like math, and there are kids who are good at that. So
it's kind of like the jelly beans in the car, right?
It is.
How many can we get?
How many can we get?
I enjoyed it, guys.
All right. Well, what a treat. Thank you, fellas.
Definitely. For David Rowe, Dave Gorman, I'm Derrick Beeler. Thanks for listening to the History of Aviation podcast.
This is Joe Morse. You are listening to the History of Aviation podcast with Derrick Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.